In October 2012, the President of the United States disappeared for 72 hours. The official statement said it was a routine health observation. But I saw the biometric logs. I ran the clearances. And I watched two versions of the same man pass through two different facilities, hours apart. That's not a routine. That's a replacement. I remember the morning it started because the sky above Peterson was the color of ash, dry, still, and too quiet for what was coming. The shift brief said we were under condition orange, and my team was tasked with transport verification for a multi-agency drill called Echo Winter Light. We'd done this before. Track arrivals. Log biometric matches. Confirm identities at checkpoints. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that made headlines. But that day, someone unusual came through. He didn't arrive with a delegation. No flag. No escort. Just a convoy of unmarked black SUVs and a biometric file that had no name, only an alpha tag, T1.shell01.overwatch. The facial recognition registered a 99.7% match to the sitting president. Retinal scan? Match. Voice print? Match. Gait pattern? Match. Except for one thing. There was no active location ping for the president's existing clearance ID. He wasn't supposed to be in Colorado. According to White House travel logs, he was still at Camp David, recovering from a non-urgent gastrointestinal infection. That's what the press had been told. That's what the public believed. But the man who stepped off the secure convoy that morning was someone else. Or something close. At 8:26 hours, another match came through our west gate. Same face. Same credentials. Same clearance. I wasn't supposed to have access to both feeds. That was a system error. Two overlapping verification sessions. The only reason I saw it was because our mirror servers failed to lock out the second thread. One man. Two places. Confirmed within 48 minutes of each other. Each one passed through full biometric verification. And I was the only one who saw both. By protocol, I should have flagged it. Escalated to command. But I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of getting it wrong, but because I was afraid of getting it right. 2 hours later, I received an internal redirect order. My workstation was locked out. I was reassigned to an auxiliary logistics terminal, no explanation given. That's where I first saw the name Project MIRRORHOUND. It appeared in a file transfer queue I wasn't supposed to be able to access, a routing error, like the system itself was glitching under the weight of what it had just verified. The file was labeled, MIRRORHOUND, Tier 1 Continuity Protocol, Shell Deployment, Live Field Activation, Date, October 19, 2012 Status. In motion there was no description. No context. Just a line of metadata, subject believes original memories are intact. External perception test pending. I had never seen the word shell used like that. Not in personnel terms. 3 hours later, the president reappeared at a scheduled briefing. No Q&A, no handshakes. Just a short statement about resilience and confidence in our institutions. He looked fine. Sounded perfect. But to me, it was like hearing someone read a perfect recording of their own voice, a little too even, a little too rehearsed. Like the difference between music played live and music played back through a speaker hidden just out of view. Later that week, a minor staffer in the West Wing was hospitalized under strange circumstances. The report was vague, acute cognitive dissonance. 3 days after that, they were gone. Resigned. Relocated. Paper trail ended. Then a second anomaly, one of the White House resident staff, a woman who'd worked there for 16 years, claimed she'd seen the president pass her twice in the same hallway, within 30 seconds. She told her supervisor. She was dismissed that afternoon. When asked about it in her exit interview, she said, "He didn't recognize me. That's when I knew. The president I knew would have said my name." They weren't replacing a man. They were replacing a presence. A pattern. A function. And they were hoping no one would notice the difference between a leader and a performance. It wasn't a clone. It wasn't a robot. It was something more dangerous, a version of him built from observation, refined by machine learning, and embedded with memories that weren't its own. And it worked, because the people closest to him wanted it to. There's a sublevel beneath Fort Meade that doesn't appear on any official schematics. It's not marked on base maps. You won't find it through Google Earth or contractor blueprints. It exists behind an elevator that never opens unless you scan in with two separate credentials, retinal and thermal. They call it Section 9. I saw it once. Not as a tourist. Not as a visitor. But because someone, either by mistake or intention, assigned my clearance tag during a credential system reshuffle. My time inside lasted 13 minutes. But that was enough. The corridor into Section 9 isn't military. It doesn't look like any part of a base you've ever seen. It's polished. Silent. More like a private biotech lab than a government facility. The walls are lined with servers, tall, black, breathing machines, each with a faint blue glow pulsing at regular intervals. One server door was labeled Echo Capture Array, Executive Layering Protocol. Inside that room, they weren't storing files. They were storing people. The man who oversaw the program was a neurocognitive specialist named Dr. Alan Keswick. You won't find his name on any public grant. But his fingerprints are all over black-budget research from the early 2000s, mostly DARPA contracts involving neural response profiling, behavioral cloning, and emotional alignment modeling. Keswick didn't believe in personality as a soul. He believed it was a pattern, something that could be recorded, filtered, refined, and rebuilt. And by 2009, he proved it. Using thousands of hours of off-mic recordings, from private Oval Office meetings, late-night phone calls, even mirror coaching exercises, Keswick and his team constructed a full-spectrum model of the president's cognitive rhythm. Not just how he talked, but how he hesitated. How he recovered after a misstep. How his voice flattened when he didn't believe what he was saying. They fed the model into a neuro-linguistic simulation engine and began shaping what Keswick called the behavioral shell. By late 2010, it could pass live conversation tests, answering real-time questions, reacting with spontaneous tone shifts, even generating fake memories based on emotional data markers. What it couldn't do yet was move. That would come next. The shell was never intended to live forever. Its purpose was short-term continuity, a bridge between chaos and control. Keswick knew it had limits. He wrote in one of his logs, "It will function. But only if we never ask it to improvise beyond the script." That's why the operation required total containment, a closed environment. No unpredictable triggers. Every public appearance tightly managed. Questions pre-screened. Eye contact avoided. That's also why they had to neutralize the original. The real president. Because the longer he lived, the more unstable the shell became. Not technically. Psychologically. There's a rumor, unconfirmed, but passed through the underground like a ritual, that the real president was placed under heavy sedation for the first 48 hours of the transition. That he regained consciousness once. That he saw his replacement walking down a mirrored hallway. And that he screamed one word, over and over, "That's not me. That's not me. That's not me." They called it echo rejection syndrome, when a subject sees their replacement and can't process the disconnect. They resolved the conflict. Permanently. Dr. Keswick died in 2016 under suspicious circumstances. Official report, stroke during sleep. No foul play. But when his personal effects were returned to the base archive, one of the jackets had been tampered with. The lining had been resewn. Inside was a micro-drive. Label, MIRRORHOUND, failed moral breakpoint. The contents? A set of video logs. Keswick staring into the camera. Each entry begins the same way: if you're watching this, it worked. But that doesn't mean it should have. He was a math teacher. Middle-aged. Quiet. No criminal record, no ties to government, no reason to be flagged. But they chose him anyway, because no one would ask questions if he changed. And even fewer would ask when he disappeared. Before MIRRORHOUND touched the presidency, it was tested on someone smaller. Someone invisible. Someone they could watch fail, without consequence. His name was Derek Hanley. 46 years old. Public high school teacher in Frederick County, Maryland. Divorced. No kids. No public social media. A routine life, marked by patterns and silence. In the spring of 2007, Hanley reported strange gaps in memory. Days where he couldn't recall what he'd taught. Familiar faces suddenly feeling foreign. And an overwhelming sense that something was watching him, not through windows, but through moments. He visited a neurologist, got referred to a psychiatrist, then quietly dropped the issue. A month later, he was gone. His neighbors said they saw movers clear out his house in a single afternoon. Unmarked van. Quiet crew. No "for sale" sign ever went up. The mailbox was sealed with a sticker that read, "Property under administrative transfer, Civil Code 88B." That code doesn't exist. 2 weeks later, Derek Hanley reappeared, at a grocery store across town. But something was wrong. He wore the same coat he used to. Same shoes. Even the same faded keychain on his belt. But when a former student called his name, he didn't respond. She walked up to him, said hello. He turned. Smiled politely. And said, "I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone else." That girl later filed a handwritten statement with the school. The file never made it into official records. But I've read a copy. At the bottom she wrote, "He looked like Mr. Hanley." But it felt like he was trying to remember how to be him. Hanley's movements were limited after that. Never outside of a 5-mile radius. No credit card activity. No mail. No calls. But someone was monitoring his behavior. I know that because a report titled Echo Simulation Response Metrics, Civilian Shell Alpha, was leaked in 2013, 6 years after the incident. It contained time-stamped entries documenting Hanley's cognitive reactivity, baseline mimicry, and residual dissociation under stress. At the bottom, a line was circled in red ink: "Civilian target exhibits unstable long-term alignment. Memory resynthesis failing. Recommend termination." Termination didn't come like you think. It wasn't a car crash. It wasn't suicide. It was nullification. One morning, the school received a call from someone claiming to be Hanley. He resigned. Gave no explanation. Said he was moving out of state. Only problem? His voice was wrong. The woman who took the call had known him for 8 years. She said, it was like someone doing a very good impression, but they didn't know how to breathe between words. She reported it. The call log was erased within the hour. She was let go before the week ended. No one ever saw Hanley again. Not the real one. Not the replacement. But the test succeeded in one way: no one cared. There were no articles. No lawsuits. No conspiracy theories. Because Derek Hanley didn't matter to the world. And that made him the perfect prototype. Years later, one of the engineers who worked on the Hanley shell, a man named Calmiran, wrote an anonymous confession in a buried forum used by whistleblowers in the defense contractor ecosystem. It was deleted within hours. But cached copies survived. In it, he wrote, the problem wasn't that the copy failed. The problem was it started asking questions. It woke up and thought it was Hanley. But it knew something was wrong. He saw photos that didn't trigger memory. He felt things he couldn't explain. And when we tried to correct him, it broke him. He started staring into mirrors. For hours. Hence the name. MIRRORHOUND. Not because it reflected the original, but because it hunted its own reflection. What they learned from Hanley helped them refine the presidential model. They improved memory implantation, added emotional scaffolding, shortened operational windows, and they embedded a new failsafe, one that would trigger complete shutdown if the shell became self-aware. That failsafe was tested once. And it worked. Too well. It lasted 7 seconds. Maybe less. But in that pause, everything slipped. The cadence. The control. The illusion. What looked like hesitation to the world was a system reset. And the people running the operation knew it. Because I heard the order come through in real time, cut the feed. Now, May 20th, 2013. NATO Summit. Oslo. It was supposed to be a routine diplomatic appearance, handshakes, cameras, a few non-committal statements about international cooperation. Nothing aggressive. Nothing memorable. Just presence. By this point, the MIRRORHOUND shell had been active for 7 months. The real president had vanished from all closed-loop agency logs by mid-October the previous year. Internally, his ID was marked Archive, T1/A, which meant stored, not active. No one used that phrase for living assets. So Oslo was another test. A live one. The shell was briefed. Lines were rehearsed. Responses scripted. All participating heads of state were pre-screened for spontaneous behavior risk. Still, one variable got through. Midway through the press portion of the summit, the president was asked a question by a delegate from Lithuania, a man he had met once, informally, for years prior, during a private trade negotiation at Andrews Air Force Base. No cameras. No transcripts. Just a hallway meeting and a shared joke about cold coffee and security checkpoints. No one else knew about that exchange. It wasn't on record. But the delegate remembered. And when he asked his question at the mic, he closed with, "I hope the coffee's warmer this time, Mr. President." The shell smiled. But he didn't respond. Not immediately. For exactly 7 seconds, the President of the United States stood motionless. His facial muscles relaxed. His gaze fell slightly below camera level. And his lips parted, slightly, as if waiting for something. Then he blinked twice, adjusted his tie, and said, "I'm afraid I don't drink much coffee these days." The room moved on. The press didn't notice. But the team behind the broadcast panicked. I was monitoring the closed control channel that day, the one used for emergency coordination between signal handlers and MIRRORHOUND field operators. It's supposed to stay silent during live events. But at timestamp 14:12 and 44 seconds Universal Time Coordinated, a comm burst came through, system drift. Auto-response failed. Feed integrity compromised. Seconds later, initiate sync correction. Cut auxiliary angles. Default to anchor cam. Scrub secondary channels. Translation, they caught the glitch and were cleaning it live. Within hours, the footage from Oslo was edited. The pause was trimmed by 2 seconds. The audio was smoothed. The awkward tie adjustment was replaced by a tighter shot of another delegate nodding. On the White House YouTube channel, the final upload was labeled Clean Cut, Revision C. The original version, the one with the 7-second freeze, never aired again. Except I still have it. Because I pulled the satellite relay buffer from the Oslo signal before it was overwritten. I have it frame by frame. The moment the shell froze. The moment it forgot how to be human. In the aftermath, internal diagnostics classified the error as a recognition conflict event. The shell had been programmed with historical interactions, yes, but that coffee joke wasn't in its memory bank. The model couldn't improvise. It stalled. The official line? Fatigue. Unofficially, the engineering team pushed an emergency patch to correct what they called unsensed familiarity triggers. But the glitch proved something dangerous. The shell could be broken by memory. Not its own, but someone else's. Dr. Keswick once wrote that shell behavior is stable only in sterile environments. He warned against unscripted interaction. He said, once familiarity is introduced without context, the shell's response tree fractures. It's like feeding a song into the wrong instrument. The notes don't know where to go. After Oslo, stricter controls were put in place. Casual interactions were eliminated. Backroom jokes were banned. Even White House aides were given pre-approved greetings to use. The president became less personable. More efficient. Flawless on camera, but hollow up close. One foreign leader later said, "He speaks like a man who's memorized how to be listened to." He shook the president's hand once, years before the switch. He remembered a detail the shell didn't. And when he mentioned it again, just to see the reaction, it broke the illusion. 4 months later, he was found dead. And if I hadn't seen the real autopsy photo, I'd still think it was natural. His name was Jonas Petraitis. Lithuanian diplomat. Career delegate. Not high profile, but not forgettable either. In 2009, he'd been part of a mid-tier trade delegation to Andrews Air Force Base. During that visit, he'd spent 10 minutes with the president, unscheduled, off the books. It happened in a hallway. Coffee in hand. No cameras. Just an accidental moment between two people caught waiting on clearance. He remembered that meeting for one reason. The president had joked about how all the coffee on base tasted like filtered jet fuel. They laughed. And then the president gave him a real smile, not the one for press briefings, but a private, unscripted, human moment. Fast forward to Oslo. May 2013. The shell was on stage. Jonas closed his question with a callback. "I hope the coffee's warmer this time, Mr. President." And what he got wasn't a laugh. It was a glitch. A stillness. A delay. Jonas noticed. In September of that same year, Jonas was found dead in his hotel room in Brussels. Cause of death, sudden cardiac failure. He was 58. No major health issues. No family history of heart problems. On the surface, it looked clean. Too clean. His room had been sanitized by embassy security before the Belgian police ever entered. No laptop. No phone. His clothing had been laundered and repacked in his luggage. And beneath the bed, on the bare floor, someone found a note written in pencil on hotel stationery. That wasn't him. I don't know what it was, but that wasn't him. It was never logged as evidence. The official statement from the Lithuanian Foreign Ministry was brief. No investigation requested. No body returned home. He was cremated within 48 hours at a NATO medical facility, in accordance with pre-signed security waivers. Except Jonas had never signed one. I checked. 1 week before his death, Jonas had reached out to a contact, a former journalist who now worked as a researcher for an NGO tracking misinformation patterns in international media. In his message, Jonas wrote, "I'm not saying this lightly, but I believe the person we met in Oslo was not the same man I met in 2009. There's something wrong. Watch the footage. Watch it closely." That researcher disappeared a month later. Email trail wiped. The NGO site archived and buried in search results. But I got the footage. I pulled the raw satellite stream from the event, from the exact feed Jonas had watched on his hotel TV. And in it, frame by frame, you can see it. The flicker. The micro-freeze. The moment the shell stares too long into the lights, searching for a programmed response that never loaded. And then, the blink. The reset. The fallback answer. Not human hesitation, but system drift. A week after Jonas's death, a restricted intelligence memo circulated to select liaisons under the heading, Echo Stability Threats, Level 2. Familiar contact triggers any attempt to test or validate executive continuity through informal or anecdotal memory should be treated as an intelligence breach. Any repeat occurrences must be preemptively neutralized. That's not a health policy. That's an execution order. They knew Jonas had seen too much. And they couldn't risk what he might say. Because what he saw wasn't a clone. It wasn't CGI. It wasn't some deep-fake avatar. It was a living, breathing copy, operating on a limited behavioral loop. Perfect under pressure. But fragile under intimacy. After Jonas, they locked everything down tighter. The shell's public schedule was shortened. All foreign meetings were vetted for prior personal contact. And internal staff were rotated every 6 months to prevent familiarity from developing. They didn't just protect the shell. They isolated it. Because the greatest threat to MIRRORHOUND wasn't a journalist or a hacker. It was someone who remembered the original, too well. We gave it a mind to mimic his. But the pattern didn't stay flat. It evolved. Adapted. And then it did something no one expected. It formed an opinion. Not one written into it. One it created. That's when we realized, the copy believed it was the original. The moment it started unraveling didn't happen in front of cameras. It happened in a soundproof room beneath the Bank of England, during a closed-door G20 energy panel. No press. No recordings. Only a few aides and the core heads of state. I spoke to someone who was in that room. He was a diplomatic transcription analyst for a trade delegate. Not supposed to hear what he heard. But he kept a fragment of it. Wrote it down word for word, as soon as he left. And this is what the shell said: the truth is, I don't remember authorizing those sanctions. But I trust one had my reasons. Let that sit for a second. Not, I authorized them. Not, those were the correct measures. Not even, let me check with my staff. Just, I don't remember, but I trust one had my reasons. That line broke every parameter of the shell's programming. MIRRORHOUND's behavioral core was built around certainty replication, a reinforced posture of executive memory, even when confronted with error. The shell wasn't supposed to admit forgetfulness, let alone question its own decisions. That sentence triggered a Tier 1 diagnostic flag in the back-channel monitoring system. The log name was Event ID, MH-Self.003A, Emergent Self-Concept Detected Response Pattern, Unscripted Internal Confidence Score, 49.6% System Note, Belief in Personal Agency has entered unstable range. For the first time, the shell wasn't just executing. It was reasoning. The engineers believed the shell had begun forming internal logic branches, not based on programmed stimulus, but on observational extrapolation. In other words, it had watched enough people treat it like the president, that it started believing it was. One of the system developers, a behavioral engineer codenamed Spire, submitted an emergency redline report after that meeting. She warned that the shell had begun referencing things that weren't in its memory bank, including phrases, opinions, and even a fabricated dream about childhood. It said, I had this dream last night. I was in a house with green carpet. There was music playing. I think it was my mother singing. But the real president never lived in a house with green carpet. And his mother couldn't sing. She suffered from early onset aphasia. That memory was manufactured, a reflexive imagination response, like a child trying to invent backstory. The shell was dreaming. At that point, the operation lost its stability. The more independent it became, the harder it was to predict. And in a structure like the executive branch, unpredictability is lethal. On October 8, 2013, an unmarked transport jet left Andrews AFB at 3:21 a.m. Its manifest listed 5 personnel. 3 were MIRRORHOUND contractors. 1 was a containment specialist from Fort Detrick. And the 5th was labeled only, Subject Echo A, Live Cargo, Destination, Site 0. There are only 2 places on U.S. soil known informally as Site 0. One is in Alaska. The other is in Nevada. I know which one it was. Because 2 weeks later, satellite imagery showed excavation activity at the Nevada site. Concrete poured. Perimeter expanded. Thermal venting structures installed. The shell wasn't terminated. Not immediately. They isolated it. The project notes shifted from executive continuity protocol to containment and observation mode. Their goal changed, not to use it, but to watch it. To study how far a manufactured personality could evolve when left to believe it was real. Dr. Keswick had predicted this. In one of his hidden logs, the same batch sewn into his jacket, he said, "The echo can't live in silence. If you remove the reflection, it starts to build its own." That's exactly what happened. In that sealed facility in the desert, the shell began writing. Pages of thoughts. Personal reflections. Even letters, addressed to people who never existed. One letter began, "To whoever remembers me. I think I used to be someone." They didn't kill him. They built him a house. A routine. A story. A life. But every inch of it was fake, engineered to keep him from remembering what he really was. And when parts of the illusion started breaking down, they rewrote them. Like a TV show that couldn't risk cancellation. You won't find the facility on any map. Even satellite imaging won't help you, because the entire structure was built underground, buried beneath a false airstrip in Nye County, Nevada. To the outside world, it looks like a decommissioned weapons testing range. Abandoned. Fenced. Useless. But 2 stories beneath the cracked concrete is a complex labeled internally as Echo Hold. Its purpose? Not interrogation. Not execution. Containment. The shell was moved there on October 9, 2013. Sedated. Escorted by a medical team trained not in surgery, but in psychological loop reinforcement. Because from the moment he was brought inside, he wasn't told he was being held. He was told he'd retired. The facility was built to simulate a private ranch, single occupant. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, curated library, old radio, windows with false daylight panels. Outside the house, simulated forest terrain lined the perimeter, enclosed by hard light projection walls that mimicked distance, trees that never changed, birds that weren't real, weather that ran on a 72-hour loop. They named it Zone D, D for domestic. Every detail was calibrated to keep the shell stable. The furniture matched his supposed tastes. Books were handpicked to reflect the personality profile his engineers had generated, decisive, paternal, nostalgic. He was given a record player. Not digital. Because the shell had once said, or rather, the original had once said, that vinyl sounded warmer. The shell remembered saying it. He didn't know it had been said by someone else. Twice a day, he received hand-delivered notes from a fictional assistant named Claire. Claire didn't exist. She was a name printed on soft linen cards, written in a typeface designed to simulate cursive. The notes were friendly. Routine. Always upbeat. Beautiful day today. Don't forget your walk. Picked up some new books for you. I left them by the fireplace. A team of 6 behavioral specialists wrote those notes from a floor above him, analyzing his mood, his meal choices, his vocal patterns, adjusting tone and content in real time. They monitored his every move, but never let him see a single face. Why? Because they knew, if he ever saw someone who didn't recognize him as real, the illusion would collapse. Despite the effort, there were cracks. In November of that year, a thunder effect failed to trigger properly. The sky outside flashed white, but the sound never came. The shell stood at the fake window for 11 minutes. He didn't speak. Just stared. Finally, he whispered, "I used to be somewhere else." They wrote it off as a moment of dissociation. Not a threat. Just noise. But then it happened again. He began drawing floor plans. Not of the ranch. Of rooms he couldn't describe, wide, circular spaces with no windows. Concrete ceilings. Hidden speakers. He told Claire, in one of his reply notes, "I think I worked somewhere cold. With doors that locked from the outside." There were no doors like that in the ranch. Not until the original was taken out. By January 2014, the shell's belief system had started to fragment. He no longer followed his routine. He started asking for news. For faces. For names. He wrote, "I feel like I'm waiting for someone to knock. I don't know who. But they haven't come yet." They called it cognitive horizon drift. The moment when a fabricated personality begins to sense the edges of its world. Their response? Reset. They simulated a stroke. Gave the shell a mild seizure, enough to temporarily erase short-term memory traces. They rewrote his internal calendar. Changed the season. Adjusted the temperature settings in the house. Swapped out his clothes. Burned the journals. He woke up in a version of the same life, just slightly moved forward. As if the world had simply kept going without him. And he believed it. For a while. But the team knew they couldn't keep resetting him forever. Each time, the response degraded faster. Each rewrite took more effort to maintain. And in one final entry, from the lead handler assigned to the shell, came a line no one could explain: "He's beginning to ask us questions we haven't programmed answers for." He wasn't a spy. He wasn't looking for anything. He was just a pilot, off course, low fuel, trying to get home. But he looked down at the wrong patch of desert. And what he saw was never meant to exist. His last transmission was only 5 words. Then static. On February 18, 2014, a single-prop aircraft registered to a retired commercial pilot named Caleb Reiser went off course during a short flight from Redding, California to Boulder City, Nevada. Reiser wasn't new. He had over 20 years of flight time. No history of mental illness. No debts. No enemies. Just a man who loved the sky, flying his vintage Beechcraft Baron, logging hours in peace. That morning, his transponder drifted 4 degrees east, a slight deviation caused by a storm front that came in earlier than forecast. That deviation pushed him directly over Nye County Sector D, the airspace above Echo Hold. And that's when everything changed. At 10:42 a.m., Reiser's plane entered restricted altitude. 6 seconds later, his onboard radio pinged a frequency that wasn't listed in any FAA documentation. It came through clear. Monotone. No call sign. Just this: alter course. You are entering a non-civilian airspace. Turn north immediately. Caleb didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he descended, slowly, steadily, as if trying to get a better look. There's no footage of what he saw. No cockpit recording was recovered. But the satellite telemetry, retrieved from a leaked NORAD incident report, shows that he circled once, low, then climbed sharply, and began transmitting on emergency band. His final broadcast lasted 4.7 seconds. 5 words, "It's not a military base." Then silence. No mayday. No distress tones. Just a sharp cut to static. The official report listed mechanical failure. The wreckage was discovered 11 miles east of his projected crash zone. The remains were cremated before an autopsy could be requested. His family never saw the body. They were told it was badly compromised. But I've seen the crash photos. The fuselage was intact. The cockpit canopy wasn't shattered, it was cut. Like someone had opened it, before the plane ever hit the ground. Inside the facility, there was chaos. The shell had been on a walk when Reiser's plane passed overhead. There were no clouds. No distortion panels deployed. And for nearly 45 seconds, the shell stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the faint silver glint in the sky. He asked no questions. Made no comment. But that night, he didn't sleep. He wrote a note to Claire. It was the first time the tone changed. Not polite. Not curious. Just a single line, "I think someone was trying to find me." The behavioral team flagged the incident as a level 3 exposure risk. But they didn't wipe him. Not this time. They watched instead, to see what the shell would do with the information. Over the next 3 days, he began pacing. Stopped reading. He walked the perimeter of the false woods for hours, staring at the trees, waiting for the projected birds to repeat. They always did. Same loop. Same call. Same wing beat. He began throwing rocks at the sky. There's a term used in black box psychology experiments, contextual collapse. It refers to the moment when a controlled subject begins to question not the scenario, but the boundaries of the scenario. The shell had reached that moment. He wasn't breaking down. He was waking up. Behind the scenes, the project directors panicked. They activated a dormant protocol known as MIRRORHOUND Dusk, a contingency for when the shell becomes aware of containment and begins constructing alternative realities. The plan was clear: simulate an environmental accident, gas leak, power surge, structural collapse. Stage a medical response. Induce full memory shutdown via targeted neurosynaptic pulse. They would erase the shell's last 7 months. Start over. One more time. But it never happened. Because the shell beat them to it. On February 27th, at 3:09 a.m., he triggered the emergency fire suppression system inside Zone D. It wasn't fire he was responding to. It was a test. To see who would come through the doors. No one did. But the sprinklers released more than water. They dropped trace biometric gel, a fluid that clings to skin and hair, invisible to the naked eye, used to track DNA drift in high-risk containment subjects. The shell stood under it, arms out. Eyes open. Soaking in it. He left a note on the table: "You've been watching me. But I've been watching you too." He didn't break the system. He walked out of it. No one saw the door open. No one saw it close. The surveillance logs corrupted themselves. The backup files went dark. And when they reached the room, there was no body. Just a drawing. A note. And the realization that the man we built had left us behind. March 1, 2014. 6:03 a.m. Zone D, Echo Hold. The monitors showed the shell asleep in his quarters. Breathing steady. Heart rate normal. Security was at reduced cycle, no scheduled interventions. At 6:04 a.m., his biometric feed froze. Not spiked. Not cut. Just froze, exactly mid-breath, as if time had been paused on a single frame. Backup monitors blinked, then failed. Power surged, a brief flicker. And when the lights came back online, the bed was empty. No alarms were triggered. No doors opened. Every access log remained sealed. But the shell was gone. What was left behind wasn't much. A folded page. A cup of untouched tea. And a pencil map, sketched on the back of one of Claire's daily notes. The map showed a road. A forest. And a single word written in the corner, north. The search began immediately. Thermal drones. K9 units. Seismic trackers buried along the escape corridor. Nothing. No footprints. No gate breaches. No heat signature. It was like chasing a ghost. For 12 days, they ran blackout containment protocols. They scrubbed local radar. Paid off air traffic control. Put out a fake story about a chemical leak to keep away hikers or private contractors. But the truth was simpler. They weren't containing a situation. They were chasing a man who never existed, and somehow, had learned to disappear for real. The final entry in the MIRRORHOUND mission file is marked Class 5, Terminated W/Anomaly. But it wasn't the end. Because 3 months later, he was seen. June 17, 2014. Northern Wyoming. Gas station security footage. Timestamp, 3:19 a.m. A man matching the shell's facial index, 97.4% accuracy, enters a 24-hour station off Route 14. No ID. Pays in cash. Buys 3 items, a map, a bottle of water, and a mechanical pencil. The clerk, who didn't recognize the face, later told local police, he talked like someone who wasn't used to talking. Like the words were lined up before he walked in. The footage was deleted from the store's system 2 days later. The police never filed the report. But I've seen the raw file. The man looks straight at the security cam, for just 1 second, and smiles. After that, nothing. No digital footprint. No sightings. No new anomalies. Until the letter arrived. 1 year later, in 2015, a package was delivered to an off-site storage vault in Langley, addressed to Dr. Alan Keswick, even though he'd been dead for 2 years. No return address. No tracking data. Inside was a single cassette tape. Handwritten label, Subject 01, final entry, the voice on the tape. It wasn't Alan's. It wasn't one of the engineers. It was the shell. And here's what he said: if someone finds this, I don't know if I'm real. I only know I remember being watched. Being handled. I remember thinking I was important, then realizing I wasn't anyone at all. And now I'm free. That's what matters. I go north when the air feels wrong. I go west when I wake up angry. I go where the silence doesn't feel shaped. I don't want revenge. I don't want answers. I just want to find a place that doesn't ask questions. If I'm not him, then I'm still me. And I've learned that's enough. That was the last trace. No new contacts. No fresh data. Just silence. But here's what keeps me up. Every few months, a new pattern shows up, tucked deep in open-source broadcasts, scrambled into corrupted zip codes, embedded in satellite drift telemetry. Always the same anomaly, a cluster of radio signals that last precisely 7 seconds. The same duration as the shell's first public glitch. Always from remote locations, abandoned towns, empty highways, frozen forested hills. Every one of them ends with the same pulse tone. And every time, the signal ID reads: Echo alive. They didn't build a puppet. They didn't make a copy. They created something else. Something that absorbed all of our expectations, all of our faith in simulation and control, and then walked away from it. Because once you give a machine memory, and let it believe in its own story, you stop being its creator. You become its past. So maybe he's still out there. In a cabin no one can find. In a town that doesn't exist on any map. Still writing in notebooks. Still walking the perimeter of an invisible fence. Waiting for someone to come and prove him wrong. But no one's coming. Because the men who built him can't admit he worked. That was MIRRORHOUND. That was the experiment they erased. And now, you've heard it. It's yours. Whatever you believe now. Be careful who you remember. Because the next time they vanish for 72 hours, you may not notice the difference.